I find myself in a very peculiar position these days of being an atheist, but finding myself constantly wound up by other people who call themselves atheists, particularly by what people refer to as new atheists, or what I prefer to call activist atheists, people who make a virtue out of the fact that they are atheists, a virtue out of the fact that they simply don't believe in God. And you see these people all the time. You see them on TV, you see them in newspaper articles, they write books, their books sell millions and millions of copies and get to the top of the book charts. People like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens before he died, people of that ilk who are extremely popular, have lots of followers, and are famous simply for not believing in God, mostly. And the reason I find these people irritating, there's a number of reasons. Firstly, they tend to be very smug, annoying, quite rude people. So they are rude about the religious. They think religious people are stupid. They think if you believe in God, you must have some kind of brain deficit. You're an idiot. You haven't thought about the world properly. They're arrogant. They think they know the answers to everything just because they've studied science or because they've kind of pushed the Bible to one side and focused instead on being rational and reasoned. They're very self-satisfied. They believe that they know the truth about everything and that the rest of us don't. But there are two things in particular about new atheism that really wind me up. The first thing is the very fact that you have this group of people who define themselves by what they're not, who define themselves through what they don't believe in rather than what they do believe in. So they define themselves by the fact that they don't believe in God, which is not really a good thing to define yourself through, because that's simply the absence of something. That's a negative. That's the lack of something. And I think if you're going to go onto the public stage, make a spectacle of yourself, declare your opinions, then it should be along the lines of what you do believe in. It should be a positive. It should be something that you have thought about and you've attached yourself to and that you take seriously. It shouldn't be something that you reject and you think is stupid. And then the second thing that really winds me up about these atheists is the way in which they reduce mankind effectively to a monkey, really. Because what they do is they don't accept the supernatural explanation for humanity that religion offers. And so they think you have to counter it with a naturalistic explanation. They say the supernatural explanation is wrong. It's not true that God created us in 6 days and created the whole world and made us what we are and you made Adam and Eve and everything else. So they say the supernatural stuff is rubbish. We have to have a natural explanation. So they say we are just bundles of DNA. We're just bundles of genes. We are effectively just quite well-evolved monkeys. We're biological entities. That's all there is to us. And they talk about neuroscience and biology and all these other scientific categories to define what humans really are. So they see themselves as demystifying human beings, but what they do in the process is they really rubbish humanity and treat us as just another animal. So what I would say, as an atheist myself, I would say I also don't accept the supernatural explanation for humanity, that the idea that God created us. I don't believe that's true. But I also think that the naturalistic explanation is not enough. It's not enough to say that human beings are just animals, just clever animals. I think there is something special about humanity, something that's actually really hard to define and really hard to pin down scientifically. So that, I think, is the real dividing line between what I would consider a proper, positive, atheistic starting point to humanism, which is the idea that we have to explain why human beings are so special, and new atheism, which just thinks human beings aren't special, that we're just animals. So those are the reasons why I find myself mortified whenever I hear fellow atheists on TV or read their newspaper columns. It's because they're smug, they're rude, they're annoying, and they define themselves through a negative, and they hate human beings. Spite is driven by a political outlook, which is humanism, or radical humanism as I prefer, which is that we have faith in humankind, not blind faith, but historical faith, as demonstrated by all the amazing things that humankind has done over the past few thousand years. So we are driven by a positive, and so when we criticise people, which we do all the time, it's because we think they counter humanism. They are going against humanism. We think they are misanthropic, or they are downbeat, or they are anti-human in some way. So our criticism is driven by a kind of overarching picture, I would argue. People may well disagree with that, but that's what I think. The difference with atheism is that it's just driven by not believing in something. It doesn't have that kind of core belief that drives it forward. All it has is that core disdain for religion and for people who believe in God. So it's driven very negatively to attack people who believe what it doesn't believe. So my problem is, I don't have a problem with people who are atheists, but I just think being an atheist is really boring. It's just, all it does is describe something you don't believe in God. Well done, congratulations. You know, lots of people don't believe in God. That's no big deal. On the question of why today, why has it come around today when religion is kind of in crisis? I think that's a really interesting question, because I think the new atheism actually springs from a crisis of humanism. It's very hard to be a humanist today because we're surrounded by political ideas that tell us human beings are crap. Environmentalism, which tells us human beings are destructive. All they do is leave a massive footprint on the planet and kill everyone. Politicians are always telling us that human beings are abusive and they have abusive relationships and they abuse children and they're perverts. That's what we hear from politicians. Popular culture tells us that human beings have really destructive relationships and men beat women and men get drunk and, you know, we're all racist. There's these constant messages from culture, from politics, from campaigners, which says human beings are really rotten people. That's what we're told. That's what the message that seeps through. So it is hard to be a humanist. It's hard to stand up and say, actually, that's wrong. It's not true. Human beings are capable of amazing things. So we're having a crisis of humanism, and I think the new atheists feel incapable of saying that humans are good. And so and they feel incapable of believing in anything strongly, particularly believing in humanity strongly. So they have this knee-jerk instinct to attack anyone who does believe in things, who does believe in the greater good of humanity or the kindness of humanity or the ability of human beings to help each other. And one group of people who believe in that idea very strongly today are religious people and Christians and Muslims and other people who still have a slightly strange, but nonetheless still have a faith in the idea that people are generally capable of being good. So you have this really weird situation today where religious people are more humanistic than the so-called humanists. That's the very strange position we find ourselves in today. I often find myself having a lot more in common with a Catholic priest than I do with a radical atheist. It's a deep-rooted problem, the crisis of humanism. It has many roots. I don't think it's caused by any one of these ideologies. I don't think it's caused by Greens or by new atheists or by other misanthropes. It's a mixture of different phenomena in the 20th and 21st century, which is just a feeling of exhaustion of the human project. I think Dave's right that there's a sense that the secular project is no longer possible. And I think the reason that that's no longer seen as possible is also because of the crisis of humanism, because the thing that you need in order to have a properly working secular society is the faith in the ability of human beings to organise their affairs and to engage with each other and to have a clash of ideas. It's the lack of faith in the ability of humans to do that, which also explains why lots of these new atheists aren't actually interested in creating a positive secular society. They're just interested in attacking individuals who believe certain things. I think it's also right that the new atheists are increasingly intolerant. You can see this in the way in which they have a hissy fit whenever a nurse wears a crucifix to work, or when Catholic schools want to teach that traditional marriage is superior to gay marriage. They go mental. They think that's terrible. These institutions shouldn't be allowed to do that, which I find really shocking. Firstly, because it's an attack on freedom of religion, and secondly, because these new atheists seem to be so stupid that they don't realise that the Enlightenment, which they claim to be adherents of, comes from a belief in religious freedom. To have these modern day so-called Enlightenment men and women saying, oh, religious freedom's a load of rubbish, take off your crucifixes, stop teaching this in your Catholic schools, stop doing that, is really a testament to how little this has in common with the Enlightenment itself or with the birth of modern day democracy and humanism. But I think just going back to the question of what religion and humanism have or had in common, the way I see it is that what they used to have in common in the past few hundred years, which they've now lost, is a belief that humans can exercise free will. Now the difference, of course, is that religions thought that our free will was kind of hampered by the existence of this higher being, by this creature who would judge us if we made the wrong decision with our free will, or who was ultimately in control of our destinies. Whereas humanists said, yes, you can exercise your free will, and you have to take responsibility for it. You are in control of what happens to you. So they had a lot in common. The thing that separated them was the question of where this free will comes from. I wouldn't say just consciousness. I think it is consciousness. It is, which is not just a small thing. It's a very important thing. It's our self-awareness, awareness of who we are, what we are, and of our impact on our surroundings. But I think it is really hard to define. The philosopher Raymond Tallis, I interviewed him recently, and he said, if human beings were so simple that they could be understood in scientific terms, then we would be too simple to understand ourselves. So there is something mysterious about human beings. There is something that you can't plot on a graph or in a pie chart or in a scientific journal. And I don't mean mysterious as in godly or otherworldly or bestowed on us by some higher being. I just mean something that is extraordinary and different from every other living creature. And, you know, as Marx said, religion is the sun that revolves around man so long as he doesn't revolve around himself. That's what religion was. Religion was our own explanation for our greatness, which we couldn't find a way of explaining in human terms. What I think what is different today is that new atheists, religious people, environmentalists, none of them believe in the greatness of human beings anymore. They don't. So I think that the humanist project today has to be to try to find a real, rational, reasoned way of explaining and convincing people of the greatness of human beings.